should be some kind of documentation for the, for the lifespan that, we had during those years. And so anyway, that, and my mom always said, I should write a book. That's what she would say when all the crazy stuff would happen, And so anyway, I did it with that in mind, and also to document, that part of Americana, because, not just our business, but all the businesses over the years, the family businesses, they all, there were similar type businesses throughout the whole country, like ours. And so it's just a recognition and a documentation of that, because, if we don't write it down, it's gone forever. So, but like I said, I grew up there. I went to grade school at Assumption, which is our Catholic school in New Haven. Then I went to St. Francis in Washington. And after high school, went to East Central, and then on to Southeast Missouri State. And after I got out of college, I first started working in a newspaper office up in Herman for Jim Anderson, the Advertiser Courier. So I was an ad manager, and then I did write a few profiles on different people in town, and had done that stuff. So I worked there about a year, and then opportunity came up with Pepsi Cola, who I had worked in the summers for, and I went to work for Pepsi, and I was an on-premise manager, which means basically you get Pepsi in wherever you can, whether it's a school, a factory, a restaurant, just up and down the street business, and also fairs. So I had a quite, a span of years there. I guess 27 years I worked for Pepsi. And then after leaving Pepsi, I had that opportunity to maybe start thinking about writing a book, because that was about, I think, 2015. But getting back to the reason I wanted to write it, back in 2012, in town, there's a farm. As you come into New Haven, you see a big water tower as you approach New Haven, and there's a road right next to that water tower that went down and it was a farm complex, that set down there, and that was the Meyer farm. It actually was the George Meyer Senior farm, and as the years went by, it became Herb's farm, and Herb's a dominant character in my book because he was always at our place and kind of almost like another uncle or grandfather to us kids. But my dad spent a lot of time in his early years growing up working on that farm with his brother Francis. You're talking about the 20s and the 30s. So there was a lot of nostalgic ties to that farm, and they were starting to tear it down in 2012. And I kept telling my husband, I gotta get down there, I gotta go down. And you can see it from the road, I think whenever I drove by, I always kind of glance, and I thought, oh, it's still there, it's still there. And then all of a sudden one day, they were starting to, tear it down. And, I thought, man, I gotta get down there I had in mind, I'll grab a board, or I'll grab something that, And so we finally go one day, and it was a very emotional time. I think it didn't really hit me until you start going down that road and you start thinking back, 40, 50 years ago, all the stuff you did at those, at that time. And for us kids, my brothers and I, it was an escape from our station to get away from the place, because we were open every day. I mean, there was no day off. It ran like a farm also, that our gas station did. So we would go to the farm and, have fun on the farm and listen to ball games underneath the tree outside, and just, whatever. And so we're going down there that day, and you're thinking back, and all this stuff just starts flooding you, because you hadn't thought about it for that long. And all of a sudden we crossed the cattle guard, which, once I heard those tones, they were the same tones that I heard as a little kid. I think everybody's cattle guard sounds different, when you cross them. The tones are different because of the depth of the hole and, whatever. But I heard those, it's just like a musical tone, and I just lost it. And then you get there and the whole place looks devastating. There was nothing I could grab because it was just piled into piles and just bulldozed, and everything is all heaped up, and except the house is still standing. And there was a man in that house that was taking the furnace out, and because he was scrapping it, and he said, I came across this, knew they were tearing all this down, so I asked if I could come down here and scrap this thing. So, and he could tell I was a mess. I was just, looking at everything, and everything was just gone, and there was this one bench sitting there, and it was an old kind of curved wooden bench, and I kept looking at it, and that guy said, that bench has been here all week that I've been here, and it's been all over this farm. As they're tearing stuff down, that bench has been moved, kind of like somebody's sitting there just watching this whole thing go back, to the earth, and I knew Herb, he made a lot of stuff for the farm down there, and he had a workshop on the premises down there. So the guy looked at me and said, I think you need to take that bench with you. So I did, and we left and heard the tones of the cattle guard one last time, and it was bad, but and then we get in, back to Highway 100, and we take a left and go down the road, and here's our old station, at that time looking very, very worn and terrible, because it was just, kind of falling to pieces. So, it was a very emotional day, and so that's what kind of drove me to write something. I think it just kind of, gurgled up in me, and I thought, I gotta write this down, and that's what started it. So, but I start the book with, glance back at my dad's young years growing up, and also my mom's, how they came to be and how they started it, and also the Meyer family. The Meyer family was a huge farm family, and they had like 11 kids, and they ended up with 3 of those kids never married, and they stayed on that farm. And so, that's how that legacy kind of kept going on that farm. And, when my dad and Francis were little, they remember, this is back in the 30s when they built that station. That part of the farm where they built it on was called Meyer's Grove. So that's why I named the book The Life and Times at Meyer's Grove. It certainly wasn't called that when I was growing up, or my brothers, but in the 20s and the 30s and probably up to 1940s, it had that tag all the time. And they had church picnics there. The big thing was shooting matches, because they had the trap, or whatever, that was why it was popular, because a lot of places didn't. And the Meyer family put up all the prizes for the shooting match. And so that's kind of how Meyer's Grove kind of got a little niche in town. And Herb, one of those kids on the farm, his twin brother, Albert, decided in '33 to build a gas station on that little spot. So my dad and his brother were just little guys at the time, and they observed all this stuff going on. Their cousins, putting up this gas station, and so they were watching in amazement, on all this stuff. And Roy Vitt at the time, of course, worked for Standard. He was the jobber in Washington that took care of the gasoline products, and Albert, was one of, and like all the Meyers, some of them were just gotta get it done, go. And of course they had the mules and the horses from the farm helping do all the work. And Francis, in the book, it even details the names of the horses and the mules that made their way from the farm to go, ready the lot and dig the holes for the tanks. Well, Albert wanted to bury those tanks, right away. And Roy Vitt's going, you can't do that, because if you do that and you don't have the gas, if we get a bunch of rain, those things are gonna pop out of the ground. Well, he demanded that he was gonna bury them, and he did, and the rains came, and and the tanks popped out of the ground, and the poor mules and the horses all had to come back and redo everything. So, my dad and his brothers saw that, just crazy antics of everything, and so, and there were struggles for Albert when he first put up the building. I think I got a picture on the table here. This is Albert and Viola Meyer, who first started the business. They built it, or Albert Meyer was a twin brother to Herb, and this is in 1933. And the building looks a little different because it has a hip roof. Albert had a lot of struggles, and after a few months going into the fall, they had a fire, and the fire pretty much destroyed that first building, and they had to rebuild it, and then they put a gable roof on it. So it didn't have a hip roof anymore, and so it changed a little bit there because of the fire damage and everything. So time went on, and I think Albert, it really was a struggle for him because back, you're talking in the 30s, the World War I, and then the Dust Bowl, all those, and the Depression. And then I guess, they finally got out of Prohibition, which that made all those shooting matches crazy because of all the alcohol and everything, So they had some storied past there of a lot of, which I have in the book, of a lot of shooting matches that really got kind of nuts. But finally the shooting matches had to go away, and for obvious reasons. But there were several different owners for about 10 years, that went back and forth. Some of the brothers and sisters took over ownership, and a few other people did the cafe, and eventually I think my Uncle Francis had the cafe at one time, and Edwin Meyer was the oldest Meyer sibling, and he had the station, and my Uncle Francis had the cafe, and then my dad got the cafe business from my uncle, and so that's kind of how it started back in '48. And eventually Dad got into both sides of the business, the gas business and that. But, that was just, they didn't live there immediately because Edwin had built an apartment onto that gas station. And Edwin and his wife lived in the back. But then Edwin got ill, and he ended up offering Dad the business, the gas business, because Edwin still had the gas. And so Dad did it. And but I think he and Mom were about 2 weeks away from building a house across the street, across Highway 100. And with that situation being the way it was, they couldn't do both. So they gave up the house and used the collateral of the lot to buy the business, and that's how we ended up back at the station for 40 plus years. But it's pretty wild because I think even all the flooring was bought for that place, for the house. And it was put into the shed in the back of the station, and it stayed there till probably about 1990. Isn't that crazy? Yeah, so they, but mom and dad, that generation of, they made so many sacrifices growing up. Dad was in the Navy in World War II, and mom was a part of a big family, and she was like the second mom to all of her brothers and sisters. So they had some rough times, but they knew what it took to make stuff work, and they did it. And the mom was of course from Washington, and dad worked at the shoe factory down in Washington. I think it was KBK, and so that's how they kind of met. And it gets into a lot of different, interesting things of them growing up and the different things that happened in the war. Dad was on an aircraft carrier, and he's one of the guys that, the planes come in, he has to, I don't know what the proper name of it is, but you have to get the cables down, catch the planes on the wheels, and all that. So that was his thing. And he said during those years, it was just, you didn't hear from anybody. You're just stuck out there in the middle of the ocean, and he had even bought mom, I think, a ring in Honolulu or something. It was a diamond and ruby ring, and then all of a sudden he didn't hear from her. And I guess he thought he got dumped, So I guess a moment of insanity, he throws the ring off the ship into the ocean, into the Pacific. And then a couple days later, he gets this letter from my mom. But, you can't imagine back then. I mean, there was no, there was no way to communicate, but a lot of people that knew my dad said, I can't believe your dad did that. So, yeah, I don't know, but, and he had some tough stuff that happened during the war too, and I think all those things end up making the people who they are and why they do the things they do. I could never understand some of the stuff my dad did for people. I thought, he's crazy, He's just, or we're nuts for doing all this. But it's funny, the older you get, the more you realize what it was about and why it happened the way it did, and all that. And so anyway, we're in the station, and my brothers, are 10 and 14 years older than me. So they had, a whole different. They had the 50s, and a little bit of the early 60s there before I came along. So, they were crazy about Cardinal baseball and, whatever kids at that age are, and of course, growing up in Catholic education in grade school, they had the storied nuns of the past, and that's all in there too. It's we were a Catholic family, with this business, and just the everyday in and outs of all the business dealings and what had to be done, and the crazy stuff that my dad had to do to make it work, And my Uncle Francis, he did pass away a couple years ago, but he gave me some great stories of the years that my dad really struggled, and stuff that we never knew about because our Dad didn't really talk about it much, and Tim and Steve were pretty small, so they probably weren't even aware of a lot of it. But it said that Dad had to barter a lot of business because people simply didn't have the money to pay for, their gas or their tires, whatever it was, and so they would bring in stuff to pay off their bill. And one day, farmer came in and paid off his bill with a boar pig. So Dad puts it in the backyard, and besides a boar pig, there were many instances of people bringing old cars and different stuff in. Dad would pull it out there and try to sell it and, you know, get money for it so he could help the people with their bills and stuff. And there was this old car that he couldn't sell. It was like a blue Dodge, and it had suicide doors, and I don't know, it was probably back, you know, it was probably a 30-something model, and it was just pretty much a hunk of junk. And Dad couldn't get it to move, so he decides to use that to move the pig around for stud service. So whenever the pig went out for a visit, he used that car, and everybody in town started realizing that whenever that car was out, the pig was in it, and the pig was going to visit to a farm. And it got to be a pretty big, fun deal in town, you know, Buster's pig going on a visit. So, you know, and finally my poor mother had to deal with so much stuff that she would just get furious over it, you know, and Dad, the worse, you know, the more furious she would get, the more he would laugh about it, because, you know, I mean, that's the only way you could get through it back in the days, I guess. But, you know, besides that, he had a few cows. Before they moved to the station, they lived up around the Assumption Church. And they lived in an upstairs apartment above a garage, and they had cows out in the back, you know, yard back there. And the cows were always getting in all kinds of gardens and stuff. And my mom, of course, was there dealing with that, trying to keep the cows out of the stuff. And she's furious, you know, calls the station one day and says, you know, either those cows go or I go, you know, make a decision. And with that, the cows broke out of the fence, and they ran, you know, down the side street by Assumption Church, and then they took a right and went down Miller Street to the station. And years ago, that was just like a cow path, because there were a lot of different farms right in town there. So it kind of sounds weird because you think today, those streets, but back then there were a lot of little farms right in the Lowney's, the Schneiders, you know, the Grannemans. Everybody had cattle and stuff. So these cows were used to a certain route. So, you know, they immediately just take out, you know, and so my dad's on the phone with Mom, and here the cows are coming down Miller right to the station, and he's on the phone conversing with her, and a farmer happens to be there at the time with an empty cattle truck. And so Dad makes the deal while the cows are marching down the street, and they cross Miller Street, and they actually are on the lot at the station, and they get the deal done, and they load up the cows, and they're sold, and the farmer takes them, you know. But you know, it was just another day, you know. All those kinds of things went on at that place, and it just seems insane once in a while when you think back at it. But, you know, it was a farming community. It was, you know, where our station used to sit, and like Highway C or like the hilltop on the next hill, Highway 100 wasn't there at that time. You know, it was, basically it was a cow path. So there was no pavement, you know, it was just a you know, pasture basically. And to get to downtown, or to get to Herman, you went downtown and out Olive Street to Highway 100 out there. So there was no 100 there where it goes, you know. So, you know, when Albert put the station here, I think there was talk at that time of what it was going to end up being, and he had the foresight, you know, the positioning of it was a great place to put a gas station for the future, but it was kind of nuts. And, you know, we have all those crazy stories, those those old stories when, you know, the volume it was just hard to make a day, you know, a day's wages, you know, dealing with all that. But eventually Dad prevailed, and, you know, there were good times on the horizon, but it was really tough. You know, we had, you know, just so many different things growing up that, you know, we were kind of, and like I said, our situation was probably no different than any other place across America with the little mom and pop businesses. They all had similar, you know, situations that they dealt with to make it, but I think they had that generation of people that made it work. You know, the people that went through a world war and grew up in the Depression, you know, the so-called greatest generation people that just stuck with it, and they did. And like I said, I chose to write more about the good than the bad. You know, like anything, we had some ugly, tough stuff too to deal with, but I thought, no, I just want to bring back more of the nostalgic times and always remember the good in the past, because there was more of that than the bad. So, but we had, you know, the bus stop was at our station, so it was originally called the Washington-St. Louis Union Bus Line. That's what it was called back before the Joneses bought it as Mid-American Bus. I think there was Sims and a Calvin Theater. They must have had it for a little bit. And then a guy that worked for Calvin Theater, his last name is Sims, had it. And then the Joneses had it. So, but they would come and pick up people at the station. It was in the morning and the evening, and they'd take them back and forth to St. Louis or Washington or wherever. And they had one of those long, extended, you know, station wagons. 1950, I forgot, they told me what it was, and I can't remember the model, but, you know, all those people would get out of the car, get out of it, and there'd be people waiting there on the white benches in front of our station to jump in, and, you know, it's just the way life was, and, you know, I can't imagine now that actually happened, and it really wasn't that long ago, you know. But we had the bus stop there twice a day, and there's funny stuff in there too about some of the parcels, because, you know, back then we didn't even have UPS or anything like that. So a lot of the shipments of stuff came by bus. So, you know, the bus would drop it off at the station, and we'd call whoever and say they had a package, and they'd come in and pick it up. Well, you know, farmers would also have things arrive there, as well as people had, you know, different medicine, and, you know, so it was an important service to have, you know, that available to people. But there again, there was some funny stuff too, like, you know, the farmers had, my mom would just have conniption fits when a package or these tanks would arrive at our station for a farmer, and it actually was bull semen. And they had this bull semen, big lettering on it, you know, and here she is in the cafe trying to make hamburgers and everything else, and the bus drops off these huge canisters of bull semen. She has to make the call to the farmer for him to come and get this bull semen because it's, you know, in dry ice and these, I don't know, you know, and it would drive her nuts, you know. And then of course my dad would have to chime in and say, you know, we're in a rural community, this is important stuff, this is, you know, it just would go on, and she would just get livid about it, you know. And, you know, the poor woman just, you know, I mean, it was insane, you know, and plus, you know, making all these hamburgers, which, you know, this had a little grill. The grill was probably about, I don't know, 2 by 3 foot maybe, if not even that big, but it was cast iron, and that's what made the burgers kind of unique and really a good tasting burger was the fact that it was a cast iron grill, and we sold a lot of hamburgers, and you know it was nothing for somebody to call up and they'd order 10, 20 cheeseburgers, and then you had all this going on, and you had oil changes going on outside and truck tires, and because back then the gas station was the multifaceted business. Today, if you look at all the different business, you got your separate muffler shops and your quick oil lubes and your convenience store, and then you have your separate liquor stores and your hunting stores that sell ammunition. Well, we sold all of that. It was crazy, in 1,200 square foot building with us living in it. So we had to have a sense of humor, because otherwise we would probably just kill each other. I don't know, because it got pretty stressful once in a while, during the 70s, during the gas wars and when there wasn't any fuel, we had to allocate people for fuel, and you could only get, whether it was 5 gallons of gas a day, and after you pumped so much, that was it, because you had to have a reserve for the fire department and the ambulances and all of that. And I was sent down the road with 2 tires and those little metal racks that display and say, okay, Dad, go to that 15th car and put the 2 tires down, put this sign on it. No more gas today. And then of course, I would be cursed and everything else. So, and they would be lined up all the way down to Pepsi-Cola to get gas, because back then we just had the 2 bay, or the single bay right in front of the station, the old iconic gas station when it had 3 gas pumps out front. Oh, it was nuts. And then, Dad, we would worry about not having enough fuel in the tanks, because we certainly didn't want those tanks to pop out of the ground like they did back in the 30s. And it got to that point where it almost happened, and Dad had the fire department ready to fill them with water because they were so low. And then Al Fisher out of the blue would call and say, hey, I got a little gas, I'll be up. And we actually closed on a couple Saturdays, and that was really weird. I mean, because the easiest thing to do was not to open, because we would get badgered so bad. I need gas, you gotta give me gas, I gotta have gas, and Dad, we just couldn't do it, So we had to deal with that stuff, and we finally would, get the gas, and finally all of that, settled down. But, just experiencing that as kids, where, you see it on the news, maybe Walter Cronkite at the time talking about it, but here we were living the dream. and dealing with all the chaos and all the stuff in between, and it was just nuts. And motorcycle gang, we had one of those hit us back in the 70s. I was pretty small, but I can remember the roar of the motorcycles coming into town. And they stopped at our place. It was on a Sunday, and there was probably 200 motorcycles. And this was, not the recreational people on the Harleys today. This was the real hardcore motorcycle gang of the past, And you couldn't hardly open your eyes because of the glare of all the chrome on those bikes, and the windshields and everything. And at the time, my dad sent my brother over across the street to help. Harry Knight had the Sinclair station, and Harry was getting bombed, and Dad was worried they would take everything, and so he said, go over and help Harry, and so they helped Harry try to keep, above water, so to speak, and I think they turned over the Goodwill box. There used to be one right on the corner there of Miller and 100, They were trying clothes on outside, all kinds of stuff. And in our cafe, they came into the cafe, and we had a few regulars in there. You know, I remember one gentleman, Bobby's Astro, he was drinking his Bush beer on a bottle. We had 3-2 beer in the cafe, and a lot of people don't even know what that means anymore. We had 3-2 beer, and then we had 5% we could sell on the gas station side, plus all the booze, you know. But we sold 3-2 beer, you know, by the bottle on the other side. But anyhow, Bob was sitting there, and you know, he was just like, "What are you gonna do with them chains?" You know, because it had chains hanging on him. And the whole place, everybody turned and looked right at him, like, "Shut hell up." You know, they're gonna tear this place apart, you know. And but sooner or later they finally left. But we had our first, you know, our first, and I guess that was probably the only real big, you know, motorcycle event that we had. But we experienced it, you know. So, you know, and then went from that to streakers. We had a streaker in town back in the 70s. So all the media people would come to town and do, you know, because that was a big deal. You know, I think Betsy Bruce and I can't remember some of the other broadcasts, but I know Betsy Bruce came to town. So the first place they would stop to get directions and to find out what the hell was going on was our place, you know. And Dad just relished it, you know. It's like, oh, you know, he would say the darndest stuff to these people, and it was like, oh my God, don't do that, you know. And but he would get a kick out of it, you know. To him, it was this, you know, entertainment, and you know, and to us, it was like, why, you know. Why are we going through this, you know? But I guess it did build strong character, I guess, you know. But it was definitely different. We had, what else did we have back in, well, you know, in my young years, I can remember, you know, the civil rights stuff. You know, we had separate drinking glasses for people and all that stuff. I mean, you know, and it was it was definitely something that we had, we were aware, but I mean, to us kids, we didn't treat anybody differently, you know, and Dad certainly didn't. I mean, it didn't matter to him, you know, but legally, you know, you had to be, you know, had this, and this at your place, you know, and so we did, and one of those crazy MyFest weekends or whatever, we had people, you know, all over the place, and one of our local guys in town, he's quite a character, his name was Marvel Mason, and he was a black man, and he came in to get something on the station side. It probably was beer or a bottle, I don't know. And as he's walking out of our station side, there are these two guys, I guess they're from the city, and you know, they made a derogatory comment, you know, like, you know, the N-word, hold the door open for us, and with that, he just knocked them both out. The guy had, I mean, he was boxer on the St. Louis circuit, you know, he was a very good athlete at the time, at those days, and he was quite a boxer. He knocked him out cold, and they were just laying underneath our old canopy at the station. And you know, it's busy, everybody's walking. Nobody gives those guys laying on the ground time of day, you know. And they finally get up and they go, what the hell just happened to us, you know? I mean, it was stuff like that every day. It was nuts, you know, and Man Walking on the Moon, you know. We had, you know, all those experiences. It's kind of like the movie, kind of like Forrest Gump, where he's in the middle of stuff, you know, and whatever's going on in the country, you know, here he is. But we had, even when Man Walked on the Moon, we closed early that night, and my dad had, a few of the customers were sitting in there, and we were watching the TV that night, Man Walk on the Moon, and everybody was arguing, you know, it was fake and, you know, all this stuff. And my dad's all upset at him because it's history, you know, and you know, all those types of things that happen for, you know, us growing up in that environment and stuff was just really different, you know. And so anyway, the book is wrote in more of a funny tone with all that stuff that happened. And, you know, through the years, we just all, you know, managed to survive it with family. And, you know, you know, my mom's family and my dad's family helped out whenever they could. You know, we'd go on some family trips once in a while to get out of Dodge. And, you know, but you know, it evolves through the years. And then actually my dad, in the end, you know, he becomes sick. He has lung cancer. And so I take him up to Chicago one weekend to see my mom's brother, lived up there. And we were going to do the Chicago tour thing, you know, spend some time up there. And so we go up there and spend, you know, a day in Chicago, going to all the big skyscrapers, Wrigley Field, all that stuff. And there was one place my dad wanted to go before we went back to my Uncle Harold's house, and he wanted to go to the Standard Oil Building. It was still called the Standard Oil Building back, it was like in, I guess it was 88, something like that when we went up there. So, you know, Uncle Harold's driving around trying to find a place to park and can't find it. So he pulls up on the side and says, I'll be back at a certain time. You guys just be out here and hop in. So my dad's getting out of the car and he goes, wait, don't leave yet. And Dad reaches in the back seat and gets his old standard hat, puts his standard hat on, and gets a big old grin on his face and turns around and walks into that building. And back in that time, people still wore suits and skirts every day. I mean, now business casual is pretty much the way everything is, but back then it was, you know, suit and tie and skirts, and more suits and skirts, you know, and everybody kind of was looking around like, what's that guy, you know? And you could see people just kind of talking to themselves, and I had to go over to the concierge desk and ask for, we did know the gentleman who brought up before the Amico came out and did a story on our business back in '83 when it was 50 years old. And they sent the guy from the public relations department out, and he did a feature story in a quarterly publication. And anyway, we knew he was still working there, so we had in mind that we would go up and try to see him in the PR department. So I go over and ask for, you know, what floor, and of course you got to take 2 or 3 elevators to get wherever you were going, because it was, you know, such a big building. And but everywhere we went, got an elevator, and everybody's like, "Who is that guy?" You know, it's just, you know, my dad he knew what he was doing. He was getting a charge out of it. You know, it's just like nobody ever saw a person with a standard hat in that Standard Oil Building. But we ended up finding the guy, and we talked to him for some time, and you know, and it was a great little thing to do. And you know, when we left, you know, back then I probably wasn't thinking that much, but now, you know, as years roll by and you reflect, you know, I think, yeah, my dad, you know, saw all those years of the service station business, you know, in his lifetime, you know, from being a little kid watching this place being built to all the different facets and the push of technology to all the way to 1990 when he passes away, you know, to see all of that, the whole, you know, basically the service station era, you know, is what he witnessed and was a part of. So, you know, now, you know, it's easy to always look back later in life and maybe get a better, you know, than when it's actually happening, you know. And now I'm glad we did that, and I'm glad he, you know, had that little fun time doing that. But you know, even when my you know, one thing I didn't talk about was the emergency systems. You know, back in the day, we didn't have ENS numbers like we do today. And I guess they still use the ENS numbers for emergencies and fires and whatever. But back in the day, you know, you just had to know the lay of the land and know where people were in order to get help to them. And we were all on the party line. And our station had the party line, and we had to blow the fire siren. And we also had the base station for the ambulance, so we had to set the tones off for the ambulances. And then we had to make sure we get backup if all of our ambulances were out of town, and our fire department, whatever, you know, if we didn't have enough to do, you know. But it was just that point in time, that's just the way it was because of, you know, the size of our town and everything. It made sense for us to do it because we were always there. And you know, my dad would get up in the middle of the night when there'd be a big fire or something, and he would pull the fire trucks out and, you know, get them ready and whatever, because, you know, all the firemen were coming from their homes or whatever. When back in the 70s, I think when we had the big gas explosion south of New Haven, we had a lot of commotion that night, and a lot of people didn't know what happened. A lot of people thought a plane crashed, you know, whatever. But, you know, it was a gas line that ruptured around Port Hudson. And, but anyhow, there was this huge, kind of like a major sonic boom, and the whole southern sky just lit up, you know. And Dad, you know, the fire phone starts ringing, and my brother Tim and I are up. I think we're watching Johnny Carson, you know, and we're watching it in our front cafe, you know, because we got the TV up in the front corner, watching the cafe, and Tim's on the phone and says, you know, the guys are going, oh, that was just a sonic boom. Tim goes, no. He said, something major happened, because the whole southern skies lit up, you know. So they're talking on the phone, and Tim said, you know, all he can see is this white blur come by him, and it was Dad in his underwear, and right out the front door to the fire department, pulling out all the, you know, trucks, and then directing traffic out in the Highway 100 in his underwear, you know, skinny guy on. So I often think if anybody ever drove through one night and saw my dad out there in his underwear and just thought, you know, the standard hat and ear flaps, you know, because it was winter, you know. And then we also had, you know, so we had all those different emergency things, and Mom and Dad often gave to the fire department and the ambulance for equipment and, you know, different things like that, because they knew it was such a vital importance and a lifeline for that. And, you know, I remember the day when, before the ambulances, when the funeral directors took people to the hospitals and stuff. So that was like, I think 67, 68 when all that changed. Yeah. But I, as a little kid, can remember that because Dad would just get furious when, you know, people would call for help, and those guys would have to go get them, and then and they had no emergency equipment at all. You know, it was just basically a transport, you know. And they would show up to the station to get gas for the ambulance / hearse. And, you know, wouldn't have it filled and ready, and Dad was like, don't you think you could have that in the car filled, so when something like this happens, you can go. You know, he would just, you know, lose it, you know. I mean, some of that, you know, all those stories are in there too. I mean, it's, and, you know, I didn't really hide anybody's name from town. I mean, you know, we told enough stuff on our stuff ourselves to make it all even, you know, but there's guys, Walter Buchholz and all these people in town and all the shenanigans and just the kind of people they were. It was just kind of like a Mayberry type of thing. Like I said, no different than the rest of the country at that time. It was just our little world at the time. And you know, when my dad passes away, you know, we had the funeral and you know, since he was in the World War II, of course, you know, we had the honor guard, you know, the Legion members did the gun salute, and they were supposed to do taps, but the one main guy that did taps in town, his name is Norv Schwaller. He couldn't do it anymore because of his age, and so they had a tape recorder. Well, you can imagine it. Couldn't get it to work right. And poor Walt. Walter was one of these guys who was the most patriotic man I ever knew in my lifetime. He was a good-hearted man, and he'd help anybody, but he would sure get stuff kind of screwed up once in a while. And he could not get the recorder to play it. And Narb is just furious, you know. And so, you know, they couldn't play taps. And Walter was very upset about it. And so were some of the other Legion guys. So at the end of the thing, you know, Narb is chewing out Walter. Take that stupid thing down to the river and throw it in the river. I never will, you know. And I mean, all this stuff, it was like, no, it was just like another day at our station, you know. It just was the same stuff. It just wouldn't end. But, you know, it's just that kind of grumpy old men type thing, too. But, so anyway, there's a lot of stuff in there that, you know, I think a lot of people enjoy reading it because it takes you back to a time when there wasn't so much technology. Granted, we had a little technology back then, but, you know, everything was much more simple, and you kind of relish that. You kind of wish once in a while you could go back to that. You know, maybe we wouldn't want to come forward if we could all go back there and stay there for a little bit, but it was what it was, you know, and I'm glad that I wrote it because I think it's, you know, it's just an important part, you know, of any town. So if you've got anything of your past that you feel important, you know, write it down. I think I'm in the process of trying to write something about downtown New Haven called Once More Around the Block in downtown New Haven, and where I bring together all these characters and give them a life again. And because I knew so many of these people, probably because I was a part of our station and I saw everybody every day. So I, you know, you feel the heartbeat of all these people, and you know the way they think and what they do and their mannerisms, and you know. So that's my goal, hopefully, to be able to put something together about our little downtown and about all the merchants and, you know, a time span of, you know, some of those other characters of town that had the Western Auto Store, Alt Heights Department Store, and, you know, Walter Buchholz's Walt Theater in downtown New Haven. You know, all those years of, I guess they could be called glory years, you know, in a way, you know, the old guard, you know, but I think it's important we don't forget them. So this is one way to not forget Myers Grove and that farm. And, you know, surprisingly, that farm is still, I mean, buildings are gone, but that property is still intact. The only thing on it is Bank of Franklin County has a building sitting on it. And other than that, that farm used to run from the Rock Quarry Road, which is the Robler Vineyard Road, and the farm went along all the way along Highway 100 to past our station. There's a little rock lane there, and then it was as deep as what I guess Robler Vineyard back there was the other line of it. But it was a nice piece of ground, and my dad always wanted to buy it from Herb, and Herb didn't wait. Like all the Meyers, they got impatient, and he sold it to a gentleman from the city. And I think my dad really, he wanted it because it was the farm, you know, and it is what it is. And someday it will not be farmland anymore, I know, but there's a lot of, there's some stories in there, the nostalgic feel of, those years and how we all did it, and just enjoy it when you read it. And like I said, it's just a bit of the past that brought to life. And Herb, by the way, I got him. He's kind of the lace through the whole book, because he just appears when there's some of these crises and different things. And towards the end, we take him to a Cardinal ball game, and it's a couple of years before he died, and we take him. It's the first time he was at the New Bush Stadium. He always went to the Sportsman's Park. But anyway, we take him down there, and he's dressed in a white shirt, tie, fedora, just kind of like a vintage 1940 baseball fan would of the time, and sitting there, and he's making a pre-call on what's going to happen, and he never did like Ted Simmons, and made it known, and was sitting there that day. Simmons is coming up next, and yada yada yada, and he's cussing a little bit, and said he's going to hit a home run. Just watch that, son of a gun. He didn't say that, but he said something else. And, second pitch, there it went, and everybody sitting around him acknowledged it, it was kind of fun. But he, he grew up with, a very poor family, in a farming family, and he was a big part of our family. And I think when Herb passes by, or passes on, we realize that those old days are gone, and we can't get that back anymore, and we're going to experience something totally different now, because it was just a part of our life and a part of our farm, or our station ran on the farm. We ate on shifts, and actually George Meyer, who was one of the Herb's brothers, he worked at our station, and I ate supper with him every night. And I didn't eat with my mom and dad, I ate with George. And we and the kids, my brothers and I, ate with him. And after we got done, then my mom and dad ate. So, it was this life, and like I said, and if you're a farming family, it's kind of like that too. Especially if you got dairy cows and everything else, you got different, different schedules and different stuff, but, somehow we did it and we prevailed, and, I don't know, it's, now it's like, did that really happen in my lifetime, because we've been rid of it since 1990, so it's hard to believe. That was 33 years ago since we exited that stage. And so it was high time that somebody documented, and like I said, it is what it is. So if you please read it and enjoy it, and maybe I'll write another one. There's a lot of stuff I didn't put in it, so I could write a sequel. But whatever. So. And if anybody got any questions, or?
I just remember when you walked in the station, it always smelled like hamburgers.
Yeah, a lot of people love those hamburgers, and I tell them it had a unique blend, and I think I put that in the book. You had your hamburger smell, you had a little bit of a splash of beer maybe, and I don't know, just a unique smell, cigar smoke. I talk about that in the, how different smells take you back. Well, whenever I smell a cigar, I think of her. you know, he always smoked Hotman cigars. And I think I wrote in there a couple different times, the unrelenting smell of cigar smoke. You know, just, you know, it was there, you know, it was just like, you know, Herb was quite a character, but to us, he was, you know, he was a big deal. It was just like having another, like I said, grandfather, another uncle, you know, and Herb could do no wrong, and he'd set us up a lot, and we'd get in trouble for it, you know, but he would do that just to enjoy it, you know. He would do crazy stuff to my poor brother Tim, you know, just setting the stage for him to get in trouble. And then mom took care of him one time. I think Tim was forced to, well, he was, I think, in the cafe, and mom's sisters were visiting, and they were all in the cafe. Herb was there. My brother Tim, you know, was a little guy, was 4 hours around. And Herb was prompting him to see what happened in the, you know, what's going to happen at the Cardinal Cub game. And my little brother says, well, the Cardinals are going to beat the hell out of the Cubs, you know. And Herb's like, I couldn't hear you. What did you say? And he would do it louder, you know, and then he'd say it again. And Tim was, you know, saying it really loud. And my mom was just right there. You know, I mean, it was daily stuff like that. You had to control the kids, you know, in that environment. And then, you know, then Herb, she made Herb go to the farm and get a bar of lye soap. And Herb had to, you know, bring the lye soap in to wash Tim's mouth. Oh God, yeah. I mean, it was just crazy stuff like that. They just, you know, it was just unrelenting, and you know, he just Herb would get into kind of messes once in a while with it all, but you know, it was comic relief. It was something that got us through the day, you know. So, but anyway, that's about it. So, like I said, if you're ever in New Haven, please come downtown New Haven. I got a little shop down there, and we've got, they're in the process of repaving all the roads in downtown New Haven. Hopefully in about 2 weeks we should be done, but barring no, you know, vast amount of rain or whatever. And so it's gonna look very nice. So we're excited about that, and you know, hopefully get it ready for another 100 years down there. So most of the buildings are from about 1850 on. I think the Grandman building might be about 1850 something. The building we're actually in is 1890. So yeah, so it's a real neat, nostalgic kind of twist down there to the way life used to be all across the country. You know, everybody had their own little towns, and you had everything from the doctors to the pharmacies to whatever in your little block of businesses. But ours is unique because it has the railroad tracks, the block itself, and then the river. So it's when you look at it from up above off the bluff at Little Thurman Park, it almost looks like a miniature train station or a train set, you know. So it's a fun little place to visit. So give us a couple weeks, and I think we'll be ready for more visitors in downtown. So, all right, that's about it.